Ladies and gentlemen, Irina Bokova and Smriti Zubin Irani. We will now proceed to the unveiling of the bust of the ancient Indian mathematician astronomer Aryabhat, that incredible mind, innovator, role model, father of Indian mathematics, who foresaw much of what is known in the mathematical and science world today. May I request the Director General and our Minister to unveil the bust and gift Aryabhat to humanity. Aryabhat, the man who stamped infinity on the thought and life of India, now belongs to UNESCO. The Minister for Human Resource Development, Smriti Zubin Irani, the Director General Irina Bokova, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to this event, which truly is the culmination of a dream. Through this unique event, we celebrate and pay tribute to brilliant minds, past and present, and significantly at UNESCO, an organization that has earned its name on building intellectual and moral solidarity among the men and the women of the world. I cannot thank my minister and our Director General enough for making this dream come true through their strongest support for this event. May I add that we are especially privileged to have in our midst two brilliant mathematical minds. Sorry, that should read as three. Professor Manjul Bhargav, Professor Laurent Laforgue, and Aryabhat. That incredible mind innovator, role model, father of Indian mathematics, who foresaw much of what is known in the mathematical and science world today. Could this event have been better? Through this evening, we will celebrate and pay tribute to the journey of mathematics from antiquity to present times, learn about the importance of simplicity in mathematics, a beautiful subject, I dare say, that we should all learn to love. There is a blatant fallacy in the way by which mathematics is perceived by people, viewed as a complicated matrix, illustrated as a foreign language, portrayed as an inborn talent. As a consequence, it has developed an isolated reputation. However, I would like to stand here today and clear this glaring misconception. I am no mathematician nor physicist, yet I see the intricacy of the field. It is a subject which can be mastered by all through unswerving diligence and unadulterated curiosity. Behind all the puzzling integral, sigma, or derivative notations, there is simplicity. It is bewildering to me that the functioning of the entirety of the universe can be expressed through graceful and elegant equations. The rotation and motion of planets, the acceleration of galaxies, the birth and death of stars. There is timeless purity in mathematics. Enough said. I now have the greatest pleasure to hand over the podium to Director General UNESCO, Irina Bokova.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. It was a great opening of this important conference, and I'm very honored to have here with us Her Excellency Mr. Smriti Zubin Irani, Minister of Human Resources Development of India. And of course, to have these wonderful mathematicians, I was thinking, you said, Madam Ambassador, that it's in the simple things, in simplicity, and I was thinking whether I could absorb everything that is in the mind of a mathematician. It should be something very, very big. And to have, of course, the final medalists and professor of mathematics in Princeton University, Manjul Bhargava, and also Professor Laurent Laforgue, also a field medalist, professor in the Institute of Advanced Scientific Studies. For us, for UNESCO, is indeed a very big honor. As a house of science, as a house of education, I would say, as a house of learning, and as a house of innovation and imagination. I think it's a unique privilege to be here on the podium with two fields medalists. And I would like to thank them for being with us and to have to participate in this final, I would say, high-level segment of the International Conference on the Zero. And of course, my special gratitude once again to Her Excellency Minister Irani to have the, I would say, to make the effort to come today especially for this important conference. I think you have come to participate in at UNESCO many times. You have been in our Leaders Forum last year when we had the General Conference and when we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the creation of this great house. And I think your presence once again is a testimony to the depth of India's commitment to the values which stay at the heart of this organization. And I still remember the historic visit of the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, last year, when he came and he spoke to our member states. When he said, on the 10th of April, he said, "We have built a modern state in an ancient land with a timeless tradition of openness and coexistence and a society of extraordinary diversity." And then the Prime Minister spoke about the power of science. He said, "For us, science is driven by the larger purpose of human development and for a safe, sustainable, prosperous future for India. Science unites people across borders in a shared purpose. And when we share its fruits with those who don't have it, we connect lives and make our world a better place." I think these are wonderful words that your Prime Minister pronounced here at this house. Connecting lives and making our world a better place. I think this expresses also the essence of UNESCO's work to advance cooperation all across the sciences. We see this pioneering role that India has always played in sharing the power of science with the world in this conference, on the history even of the Zero, whose origins can be traced to India, which was then transmitted to the Arab world and to Europe. This is a story of ingenuity and wonder, and I would say sheer intellectual firepower. The concept of zero was first recognized by the great Aryabhata, the great mathematician and astronomer of the classical age of Indian mathematics, whom we will honor together after this session as a humanist, as a pathbreaker for all humanity. We are particularly prized at UNESCO here to receive this gift. And once again, thank you, Madam Minister, of this bust that you have given us. And I believe this eminent Indian sculptor, Mr. Sutar, who is not with us here today, but I think he's following this event through the webcast. So I would like to pay great tribute once again to him for his generous contribution to the organization. As one of the most prevalent global symbols, the zero, with the other 9 digits, opened a new world of science and I would say cultural expression, manifested in mathematics, astronomy, architecture, from the classical age of Indian science to the European Renaissance, through the Islamic Golden Age. In the words of the great mathematician Tobias Danzig, in the history of culture, the zero will always stand out as one of the single greatest intellectual achievements of the human race. The zero is a foundation upon which mathematics, physics, astronomy, chemistry, and biology all have flourished. This stands for zero, and for a wide horizon of breakthroughs nurtured in India over the centuries that have changed the way we grasp the world. Mesdames et messieurs, nous célébrons aujourd'hui, aux côtés de l'Inde, le rôle essentiel de l'innovation scientifique dans le développement de toutes les sociétés. La science nous aide à mieux comprendre le monde, elle nous élève et elle renforce également le sentiment de notre humanité commune, car les différences d'origine, d'opinion, de croyances s'estompent dans la fascination que nous éprouvons tous pour les découvertes de l'esprit humain. Ce principe est l'une des valeurs fondatrices de l'UNESCO pour rapprocher les peuples et construire la paix. Ce message n'a jamais été aussi important en ce moment où les États membres s'engagent dans la mise en œuvre de l'agenda de développement durable 2030. Le monde a besoin de science pour le mener à bien. Il a besoin de science pour renforcer les politiques publiques, trouver les réponses aux défis du changement climatique, construire les sociétés plus résilientes. Le rôle de l'UNESCO est d'aider l'État membre à résoudre ces questions d'une manière collective, à placer la science et l'innovation au cœur des stratégies nationales et à renforcer les capacités dans ce domaine-là. L'Inde est un acteur central de cette ambition et possède une longue tradition de partage de ses connaissances et de ses compétences avec le monde entier, depuis l'Antiquité. Aujourd'hui, l'Inde est un partenaire central de l'UNESCO pour la protection de la biodiversité, la sauvegarde du patrimoine et de la diversité culturelle. Lors de sa visite à l'UNESCO en avril dernier, le Premier ministre indien déclarait aussi « Les graines de notre destin commun sont plantées dans l'esprit humain. L'UNESCO les éclaire par la lumière de l'éducation et l'esprit d'investigation. » Je crois que l'histoire de Zéro incarne cette vision et porte mieux qu'aucune autre le pouvoir d'une idée à changer le monde. Merci à tous d'être venus ici partager ce pouvoir et merci encore une fois au gouvernement indien de cette belle initiative. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre, d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Merci.
I will now request the Minister for Human Resource Development of India, Smriti Zubin Irani, to address the audience.
Director General, Madam Bukova, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to speak to the conscious keeper of the United Nations. No organization is more central today as we set out on our collective journey towards Agenda 2030. It seeks to complete the unfinished agenda and unkept promises on education for all. It nurtures the sciences as a vital driver of sustainability. Its advocacy of culture as a driver, enabler, and enricher of sustainable development advanced a human-centered and inclusive approach to development, in addition to serving as a powerful socio-economic resource. Through all of this and more, it seeks to build the redoubts of peace in the minds of men and women. The history of UNESCO has reverberated with firm and resolute voices from India calling for peace and universal brotherhood. That greatest apostle of peace, Mahatma Gandhi, expressing deep interest in UNESCO to secure peace through education and culture, had pointed out that real security and lasting peace cannot be secured so long as extreme inequalities existed in education and culture amongst the nations of the world. And speaking here last year, during the course of his historic visit, our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi had said, "No organization serves our cause more than this one. The seeds of our collective destiny are sown in human minds." The message is clear. Our world is and will remain a better place because of UNESCO. Ladies and gentlemen, I am conscious that I speak as a representative of one of the most ancient of existing nations, as well as amongst the most early and most rapidly modernized, a nation where knowledge and wisdom are deeply revered and respected. Knowledge in the Indian tradition is that wealth that increases by giving. It is supreme of all possessions. The beginningless and internal Veda reveal a knowledge that is permanent and changeless. They contain a knowledge that is not just religious or philosophical or only spiritual, but harbor facts and information that science has proved true today. The soaring majesty of the Vedas, which has guided India for thousands of years, renders them timeless. This great knowledge tradition of the Vedic period was continued by India of the later period, when pioneering inventions and discoveries were made, which form the foundations of diverse streams of knowledge today. An amazing amount of work was produced in mathematics, algebra, physics, cosmology, medical science, philosophy, the languages, the arts, and more, which is unbelievable considering their antiquity and yet their accuracy. And it is the great heritage of knowledge and insight that attracted the wisest to India from lands far away. Scholars and students from China, the Middle East, Mediterranean took arduous journeys to ancient Indian universities of Nalanda and Takshashila to learn and imbibe the very best of our wisdom and thought. In his landmark television series Cosmos, the American astronomer and cosmologist Carl Sagan had acknowledged, ages ago, he said, the vast subcontinent of India birthed explorers and innovators who focused on the inner realm. Those geniuses, spiritual sages, or scientists of consciousness, depending on your perspective, gave us insights that have profoundly influenced religion, healthcare, psychology, the arts, and other areas of life. The way we understand ourselves and the universe has been shaped by India more than we can readily appreciate. But it is not that we rest only on our proud history alone. Today, India is at the cusp of great transformation, a modern state in an ancient land where progress lies in the empowerment of our people. We have launched the most ambitious programs to provide knowledge and skills to our youth and education for every child in the remotest of villages of our nation. And we are determined to empower that 50% of our population without which there can be actually no progress of any nation. The flagship program of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao seeks to empower every girl child in India. It is also in this spirit that we in the Government of India delivered upon the Swachh Vidyalaya program, identified as a weak link in our effort to educate girls. But this is not all. Beyond these building blocks, we want our girls to grow wings and soar. Udan, or the flight of the girl child, will empower the economically disadvantaged amongst our girls to pursue a STEM career path. This focus on access is matched by the emphasis on quality in keeping with the SDG 4 and its related targets, which makes quality now a prerequisite of education. Through our national mission on teachers and training, we seek to increase the availability of teachers and improve the quality of existing teachers through training and retraining. Through our global initiative for academic networks and in the spirit of international cooperation and exchanges, we invite academicians and experts from across the globe to teach in India and fill knowledge gaps by engaging with our students and faculty with a view to creating networks for long-term research. In the first phase, we have already scheduled 400 academic courses over a period of next 6 months, of which 70 have already been conducted. In order to provide an idea of relative quality of Indian institution, for the first time 6 months ago, we had launched our National Institution Ranking Framework. We had committed to our nation to publish the first ever ranking on the 4th of April 2016, and thereafter on the first Monday of April every year. We have honored this commitment to our nation and our countrymen and women, and in fact have announced the first ever national ranking of 300 institutions just yesterday. Our goal is also to leave an imprint on time through support for research, innovation, and technology in India. The research that we seek to encourage will be in 10 broad areas and, above all, in alignment with the needs of our nation. It will be an interdisciplinary effort for which 24 ministries of the Government of India have come together, signing an MOU on the 31st of March 2016. Also to nurture amongst our children a spirit of inquiry, creativity, love for science, mathematics, and effective use of technology, the Rashtriya Avishkar Abhiyan, or the National Innovation Movement, has provided a convergence framework to encourage children who show an inclination and talent for these subjects and supports them for higher academic excellence and research. I would like to tell you, Madam, that I speak of these initiatives because they are very much in line with the goals that have been set forth by the UNESCO, so that lifelong learning experience enrich our nations and people at large. Madam, I would like to say that in the challenge of our times, as we journey towards Agenda 2030, we see UNESCO as more accordant and relevant. The dignity of the human being must lie at the heart of our every effort if nobody is to be left behind. Since its creation 70 years ago, in the aftermath of the devastation wrought by World War II, UNESCO has been champion of the cause of peace through a collaboration in education, science, and culture, all of which are indispensable to the dignity of man. It is in this spirit that we in India have envisioned this conference. It is our tribute to the world of mathematics and science. Above all, it is a tribute and homage to that most supreme of all possessions, knowledge. UNESCO is the torchbearer of this precious flame, and as it seeks to transition us to the knowledge-based societies that we all aspire to for the greater global good, I am honored, therefore, on behalf of India, to gift to UNESCO the bust of the ancient Indian mathematician, astronomer, Aryabhat. There is much that we can learn from the intellectual brilliance of this great mathematical genius and from his service to mathematics and science, founded on that indomitable spirit of inquiry and that relentless pursuit of knowledge and innovation that is the hallmark of every great man. He was the master who stamped infinity on the thought and life of India. And today, as he arrives at UNESCO, to this temple of peace, and here onwards, he belongs to humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, I will close this message from a passage from the Yajurved, which resonates with the mandate of UNESCO, the need for peace, and it is a message that is more relevant today than ever before. In Sanskrit, it says, Om Dhyo Shanti, Antariksha Shanti, Apah Shanti, Aushadhayah Shanti, Vanaspatayah Shanti, Vishwadeva Shanti, Brahma Shanti Reva Shanti, Sama Shanti Redhi, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let there be peace in heaven. Let there be peace in the atmosphere. Let there be peace on earth. May the waters and medicinal herbs bring peace. May all the trees give peace to all beings. May all the gods be peaceful. May all Vedas spread peace everywhere. May all other objects everywhere give us peace. And may that peace comes to us and remains with us forever. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Minister. I now will turn to the mathematicians who will speak to us a little bit about the zero, the theme of the evening. And Professor Laurent Laforgue, he's well known to everybody. He is from the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques. He will tell us about the importance of simplicity in mathematics. Over to you.
Je vais parler en français, ce qui est plus facile pour moi. Madame l'ambassadrice, Madame la directrice générale de l'UNESCO, Madame la ministre, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureux d'être ici. Il y a quelques semaines, lorsque j'ai été invité à participer à cette conférence, je me suis dit que je ne pouvais pas refuser cette invitation pour plusieurs raisons. La première raison sur laquelle je vais revenir est que l'invention du zéro est certainement l'une des inventions les plus importantes de l'histoire des mathématiques. L'autre raison est que, en tant que mathématicien, et que mathématicien français, j'ai des liens particuliers avec l'Inde. J'ai été très souvent invité en Inde dans différents instituts de recherche. Donc c'est un pays où je reviens toujours avec grand plaisir, où je connais beaucoup de collègues. Il faut savoir d'ailleurs que depuis plusieurs décennies, il existe une coopération particulièrement intense entre mathématiciens français et mathématiciens indiens, les uns et les autres faisant partie de la grande communauté mondiale des mathématiciens. Je reviens maintenant au zéro. Lorsque j'ai reçu cette invitation, je me suis souvenu tout de suite d'une phrase prononcée par Alexandre Grothendieck, certainement l'un des plus grands mathématiciens du XXe siècle, parlant de l'invention au XIXe siècle de la notion de groupe par Évariste Galois. Donc une notion très très simple qui depuis a envahi toutes les mathématiques et qui s'est révélée extraordinairement féconde. La phrase de Grothendieck était que l'invention de la notion de groupe par Galois était la plus importante en mathématiques depuis l'invention du zéro. Donc c'était une manière pour lui d'exprimer à quel point cette invention était importante. Et néanmoins, vous voyez dans sa formulation que lui-même considérait l'invention du zéro comme plus importante encore que celle de groupe. Donc c'est une chose qui peut paraître étonnante dans la mesure où, pour nous qui y sommes habitués, pas seulement les mathématiciens, mais nous tous, rien ne peut paraître plus simple que le zéro. Pour illustrer cette importance, j'ai essayé aussi de repasser en esprit les mathématiques que je connais. Et juste en y réfléchissant, je me suis rendu compte que la plus grande partie des mathématiques qui existent aujourd'hui, c'est-à-dire concrètement la plus grande partie des livres et des articles qui sont publiés en mathématiques, ne pourraient pas être écrits sans le zéro. C'est-à-dire que si on voulait les écrire, alors même que ces livres et ces articles parlent de beaucoup d'autres choses que le zéro, on serait amené, si l'on ne connaissait pas le zéro, à exclure constamment la possibilité de l'annulation. Et en fait, c'est ce que faisaient les mathématiciens européens encore à l'époque de la Renaissance. Dans les livres de ce temps-là qui parlent, par exemple, de ce qu'aujourd'hui on appelle les équations polynomiales de degré 1 ou 2, on voit que sont distingués un grand nombre de cas différents parce qu'on ne dispose pas encore de la notion de zéro et on ne dispose pas, ou en tout cas on n'est pas habitué à se servir de la notion de nombre positif et de nombre négatif. Donc ce handicap intellectuel oblige à une grande complication pour des choses qui aujourd'hui sont considérées comme très simples, et s'agissant de choses beaucoup plus sophistiquées, comme on les pratique aujourd'hui, elles seraient simplement impossibles à formuler sans le zéro. Donc c'est dire à quel point le zéro est important. reconnaissant son importance, on peut se demander pourquoi il a été si difficile dans l'histoire de l'humanité d'inventer le zéro. Le zéro, cela a été dit, bien sûr, a été inventé en Inde, alors que les latins, par exemple, ignoraient le zéro. Même les Grecs, qui pourtant ont inventé les mathématiques au sens où on les entend aujourd'hui, même les Grecs ignoraient le zéro. Donc pourquoi l'invention du zéro a-t-elle demandé une civilisation particulière, un lieu particulier, à la fécondité intellectuelle particulièrement importante? Pourquoi est-ce que cette invention si nécessaire et si utile n'a pas été faite partout, plus tôt, aussitôt qu'on a appris à compter? Eh bien, je pense que c'est pour deux raisons. La première raison, c'est justement à cause de la simplicité du réseau, la simplicité du zéro. On voit sur cet exemple particulièrement impressionnant quelque chose qui est constant en mathématiques, à savoir que rien n'est plus important que les choses simples, mais rien n'est plus difficile à imaginer, à trouver, à formuler que les choses simples. D'une certaine manière, quand on pratique les mathématiques, on apprend que le plus simple est en même temps le plus difficile. Alors cela sonne comme un paradoxe, il faut comprendre que ce paradoxe doit être entendu en un sens chronologique. C'est-à-dire que, d'abord, avant l'invention, on ne comprend même pas qu'il manque quelque chose. On peut ressentir éventuellement un certain malaise. Par exemple, ces mathématiciens de la Renaissance européenne qui étaient obligés de distinguer différents cas suivant la forme des équations. Donc, bien sûr qu'ils devaient ressentir que ces différents cas étaient une unique histoire qu'ils racontaient sous des formes différentes, mais ils étaient incapables de la raconter de manière unique parce qu'il leur manquait un mot, un concept, une idée, l'idée de zéro. Et voyez comme il est difficile d'exprimer le manque de quelque chose si cette chose-là, vous ne disposez pas encore pour elle d'un mot. Vous ne l'avez pas introduite. En revanche, une fois que la chose a été introduite, une fois que le mot a été introduit, que le concept a été assimilé, il paraît totalement évident et on ne peut plus s'en séparer. Un autre aspect extrêmement important de la simplicité mathématique, qui est particulièrement évident avec le zéro, ce n'est pas seulement que c'est un concept, c'est aussi une notation, et une notation particulièrement heureuse. Effectivement, dans le tracé du zéro, il y a une sorte de satisfaction particulière, cette courbe qui se referme sur elle-même, d'une certaine manière la plus simple de toutes les courbes qu'il soit naturel de dessiner à la main, et qui, effectivement, convient particulièrement bien à un concept tel que le zéro. Voilà, donc en fait, cette chose-là aussi est extrêmement importante en mathématiques pour la fécondité ultérieure des concepts, disposer d'une notation qui soit particulièrement adaptée. Or, c'est éminemment le cas de la notation du zéro. Voyez d'ailleurs que un autre point qu'on peut ajouter, dont il a peut-être été question dans les exposés précédents, malheureusement je n'étais pas là, c'est l'importance également du zéro dans la notation positionnelle. Pour les chiffres, ce à quoi nous sommes habitués aujourd'hui, la notation décimale, qui permet d'écrire de manière uniforme des nombres de longueur arbitrairement grande, et où, là encore, on a absolument besoin du zéro. Cette notation positionnelle des nombres serait impossible si l'on ne disposait pas du zéro. La dernière chose que je voudrais dire à propos du zéro et de ce qui l'illustre de la simplicité en mathématiques est l'importance en mathématiques de l'imaginaire et de la dualité entre réel et imaginaire. Le zéro, en un sens, est quelque chose qui n'existe pas. C'est-à-dire que lorsque l'on veut apprendre à un enfant à compter, 1, 2, 3, on peut mettre devant lui un bâtonnet, 2 bâtonnets, 3 bâtonnets, ou bien une bille, 2 billes, 3 billes. Voilà, donc il a devant lui le chiffre 1, le chiffre 2, le chiffre 3, etc. Et comme on peut utiliser à la fois des bâtonnets, des billes ou tout type d'objets semblables pour compter, eh bien, il est complètement naturel, presque automatique, de passer à l'opération plus abstraite qui consiste à considérer le chiffre pur. En revanche, le zéro est quelque chose que l'on n'a pas devant soi. Et moins encore la notion de nombre négatif qui est rendue possible par le zéro et qui est également extrêmement importante en mathématiques. Or, pourtant, nous savons tous que disposer du zéro et des nombres négatifs et pouvoir les manipuler, pouvoir calculer avec eux, est d'une très grande facilité, d'un très grand usage dans les calculs, même si finalement, à la fin des calculs, on ne s'intéresse qu'à des nombres positifs. Dans la vie concrète, la plupart du temps, on ne s'intéresse qu'à des nombres positifs, mais même pour considérer des nombres positifs, il est beaucoup plus pratique de disposer également du zéro et de nombres négatifs. Par exemple, supposez que l'on vous dise que vous voulez ajouter 3, retrancher 5, ajouter 4. Alors, vous comprenez qu'en réordonnant les chiffres, on va pouvoir faire le calcul de façon à rester toujours dans les nombres positifs. Mais pour cela, il faut procéder à une opération un peu compliquée qui consiste à réordonner les chiffres. Alors que si on accepte les nombres négatifs rendus possibles par le zéro, on n'a pas besoin de cet ordre. Donc j'ai dit 3 ôt de 5, je crois. Donc voilà, 3 moins 5 égale moins 2. Puis ensuite, je peux ajouter des nombres positifs qui vont me renvoyer dans les nombres positifs. Mais le fait d'avoir plongé le monde réel, entre guillemets, des nombres positifs dans un monde imaginaire, conceptuel, intellectuel, où les nombres positifs naturellement donnés sont complétés par le zéro et les nombres négatifs. Donc ce fait-là a beaucoup facilité l'usage concret des nombres. Et donc, vous voyez sur cet exemple particulièrement simple l'importance de l'imaginaire en mathématiques et de sa relation au réel. Donc, pour conclure, je vais simplement vous dire, puisque j'imagine que la plupart d'entre vous n'êtes pas mathématiciens, qu'en fait, l'histoire du zéro n'est pas terminée. C'est-à-dire que vous tous connaissez bien sûr le chiffre 0, mais ce chiffre mais la fécondité du concept de 0 n'est pas épuisée par son utilisation en termes de chiffres, et les mathématiciens contemporains au XXe siècle et encore aujourd'hui ont utilisé le 0, lui ont donné des sens donc en le voyant comme un élément dans des structures plus abstraites, comme par exemple des structures de groupe, j'ai prononcé tout à l'heure le mot groupe, ou bien des choses encore plus abstraites, donc des objets de catégorie abélienne, enfin je prononce des mots très savants, mais où, disons, différents contextes mathématiques de plus en plus riches, où malgré tout, l'objet central reste le zéro. Donc voilà ce qui me paraît important à retenir l'importance et la fécondité des idées simples en mathématiques. Et en fait, on ne peut pas trouver de meilleure illustration de cette importance de la simplicité que le zéro. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Professor Laforgue. You said it in a mathematical context, but for me that is also a life principle. Sometimes simplicity is the most difficult thing to achieve. Thank you very much. And now I have the greatest pleasure to ask Manjul Bhargava to come to the podium and speak to the audience about the great Indian mathematical legacies of, I think, Aryabhat, of course, and Brahmagupta, and others maybe also. Manjul.
Well, bonjour and namaskar again. Honorable Ambassador of India to UNESCO, Richard Kambodge, Honorable Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, and the Honorable Minister of Human Resource Development, Smriti Irani, Professor Laurent Laforgue, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here at this wonderful gathering, this international conference on the zero. Thank you so much also to all the organizers. Since I'm the last speaker, I just want to thank the number of people who put so much effort into making this conference such a nice event for so many people, and for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts on the zero and the profound mathematics that lies in it and beyond it. For me, the goal of this conference has been twofold. One, to celebrate and reaffirm the role of the zero and of other Indian and related contributions to mathematics and science in the development of our society and our science today. But second, also, to remind the world about some of the specific mathematicians from India that truly changed the subject and the world through their contributions. In particular, we pay homage today to the great mathematician and astronomer Aryabhata, whose bust will be gifted and unveiled at UNESCO during the session. It's already been done. I guess this counts. Does it stay here?
Yes,
in this room?
Does. Not in this room.
Okay.
Even better place.
I see. Okay. I was just wondering which part UNESCO headquarters means. Okay. Well, after Professor Laforgue's very beautiful description of the importance of simplicity and elegance in mathematics, that the simplest and most basic ideas are the ones that often end up being those that are the most influential and profound. What I thought I'd talk about briefly today are some of India's fundamental and simple, but subtle, elegant, and profound contributions to mathematics that have transformed the subject and that I feel we all should know, but for whatever reason are often not taught in school. There are, of course, too many such contributions in mathematicians to mention just here right now, but a number have been discussed during the technical sessions over the last day and a half. Here I thought I would say a few words about some of those contributions that are also most accessible to the general public, and also what I feel are the most inspiring and relevant to school children, and yet are generally not taught in school, even in India. The concept of zero originating in India is a good starting point. And that, of course, is well known. Many of you may have seen the t-shirt that Indians proudly wear that says, "India's contribution to mathematics is zero." Some of the t-shirts even have a subtitle saying, "We always knew we were good for nothing." So this is one fact that is well known in India. Though it's perhaps worth explaining what is meant by this phrase, India's contribution to mathematics is zero, as it is perhaps India's greatest contribution to daily life. The concept of zero itself is very simple, as Laurent said, but it is what India did with it that truly changed science. So there are sort of two things that India did with the zero. and Laurent mentioned them. I want to say it in a little more detail. First, the way we write our numerals today, using the symbols 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. That comes from India. It's a vast improvement over other numeral writing systems that were used in other parts of the world, such as the Roman numerals, where to write larger and larger numbers, one needed to introduce more and more symbols. For example, in the Roman numerals, one has to have symbols for the ever larger numbers I, V, X, L, C, D, M. And when the symbols run out, the numbers that we can write also run out. The great French mathematician Laplace in 1814 expressed it as follows: the ingenious method of expressing every possible number using a set of 10 symbols, each symbol having a place value as well as an absolute value, emerged in India. The idea seems so simple nowadays that its significance and profound importance is no longer appreciated. Its simplicity lies in the way it facilitated calculations and placed arithmetic foremost among useful inventions. That's Laplace in 1814. The first surviving manuscript in which this Indian system of enumeration is found is in the Bakshali manuscript, which was composed perhaps as early as the year 200 or even earlier. And in this manuscript, the 6-digit number, 846,720, occurs, as well as the 3-digit numbers 330 and 947, written the way we write those numerals today. The symbol 0, which occurred in 2 of those numbers I mentioned, was only written at the dot as a dot at the time. And over time, the dot grew into this circle that continues, as Laurent described it beautifully, in perpetuity. The manuscript was written in a combination of Sanskrit and Prakrit. The system of writing numerals, that same system of writing numerals, also occurs in a number of early inscriptions in India, some of which, again, contain the 0, and as time goes on, that dot you see getting bigger and bigger, being recognized as a true number in itself. The system of writing numerals as a method of doing mathematics and doing science, and as a tool for complex calculations. You can imagine comparing doing calculations with Roman numerals versus doing them with the Indian system of numerals. The system of writing numerals as a method of doing mathematics and science, and as a tool for doing difficult calculations and recording scientific results, that first occurs systematically in Aryabhata's work. One of the reasons that Aryabhata's bust is being brought here today for this conference on the 0. He's the first one really to systematically use it for science and to do calculations with it. So that's one area where 0 transformed the way we do mathematics and science today, via the method by which we write and calculate with numbers. But there's the second area where 0 transformed the way we do mathematics and science, in the development of the mathematical and algebraic properties of 0 as a number. The development of 0 as an actual number in itself was, of course, facilitated by the numeral system that was starting to dominate Indian thinking, when numbers were being written with the symbols 1 through 9 and 0. But recognizing 0 as a number with which you do arithmetic calculations and algebraic calculations, that was carried out by one of the great mathematicians of India and of the world, Brahmagupta, in the year 628 in his classical treatise, Brahmaspurta Siddhant. So prior to Brahmagupta, numbers meant to humans 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. As Laurent mentioned, you can represent those numbers as sets of sticks or as marbles. To include 0 as an actual number in our number system, with rules such as 0 times any number is 0, 0 plus any number is that number itself, and so on, this was first formulated by Brahmagupta. This turned numbers from being just 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on to also include 0. And then Brahmagupta goes on to introduce the negative numbers, also as numbers on an equal footing with the usual numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this contribution, where you included not just 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, but also 0, and then the negative numbers, really laid the foundations for modern mathematics and algebra. It turned the whole numbers into a group, as Laurent said, and in fact into a ring, because Brahmagupta actually wrote down all the ring laws on the whole numbers. So the fact that we can take 0 and the negative numbers and do the usual addition, multiplication, division, subtraction on them that we did with positive whole numbers before, that was a huge revolution that laid the foundations for algebra. And this is the legacy of Brahmagupta. So that's the meaning of the greatness of 0 and India's contribution to the theory of the 0. The number system, as was developed starting with the Bakshali manuscript that we see. The fact that we can calculate with these new system of numerals to write arbitrarily large numbers with just 10 symbols and do science with them, that's as in Aryabhata's work, around the year 500. And then finally, the expansion of our number system to include 0 and the negative numbers with all the rules that we now use for addition and multiplication. That is due to Brahmagupta in around the year 628. So this is a huge legacy of India at that time. And it's understandable, therefore, that people now humorously say India's contribution to mathematics is 0. What I want to point out now is that India's contribution to mathematics is actually much greater than 0 in both senses. So I want to mention 10 mathematicians from India, along with one fact about each to illustrate how they transformed science in order to make this point. In my view, these mathematicians should also be household names, but for the most part are not taught about in schools, even in India. They each came up with at least one completely simple, elegant idea that transformed mathematics. Textbooks from colonial times have largely not changed, and it would be great to finally tell some of the inspirational stories of these inspirational people. One of the very early mathematicians from Vedic times wrote the first known textbook on geometry. His name is Bodhayana, from about 800 BC. He's the author of the first known textbook on geometry, which contains many theorems on geometry, some of which are proved in much the same way that we prove theorems today. And in particular, Bodhayana's Shulba Sutra from 800 BC contains the first known general statement of the Bodhayana Pythagoras theorem, what we now call the Pythagorean theorem, although gradually one can think of this being as the Bodhayana Pythagoras theorem. It also contains, the Shulba Sutra contains the first indication of a proof of the theorem, and this is back in 800 BC, pre-Pythagoras, one of the great geometries of history, and the first example of a mathematician that's largely not discussed in schools, but contributed something very fundamental, in particular the Pythagorean theorem. Another great mathematician so these choices of 10, of course, are somewhat arbitrary. They're very personal for me. These are mathematicians that inspired me when I was growing up and reading their works. Another mathematician in the history of mathematics that comes up in Indian history is Painini, about 500 BC. And so Painini is the discoverer of generative grammars, which is an area that's very important in theoretical computer science. In particular, he used his discovery of generative grammars to write a complete grammar for the language of Sanskrit, something that had never been done for any language before and really hasn't been done since. His grammar in particular includes a complete mathematical description of phonetics. So Painini is another name that we all should know. Pingala, a mathematician who followed shortly after Painini, is the discoverer, in particular, of the binary system, how to change between base 10 and base 2. Algorithms were first described by Pingala in his treatise on prosody. And I got to talk a little bit about Pingala this afternoon in the context of helping to define binomial coefficients, and in particular the Pingala-Pascal's triangle that we all learn in school, but we don't learn it with Pingala's name. Aryabhata is the man of the hour. I already mentioned his use of positional notation to do calculations using implicitly the zero. But maybe one thing that people often don't know is that Aryabhatta is also very well known for introducing the sine function and the cosine function to the world, and thus marking the birth of trigonometry. Aryabhatta called the sine function jya, or jiva, and that word was transliterated in the Arab world as jaib, because short vowels were not really used in Arabic. And from that Arabic word jaib turns out to mean bosom. And so when that word was transmitted to Europe, the Latin word for bosom is sinus. And so suddenly the word became sinus in Europe, and eventually was shortened to sine in English. And same for korti jya became cosine for the same reason, co-bosom. So that's the transmission of these functions, sine and cosine. They started out in the work of Aryabhatta. So that's another fact that often isn't mentioned in schools, but that's the part of the origins of trigonometry we owe to Aryabhatta. Brahmagupta, I already mentioned, he introduced integers. Brahmagupta is from about the year 600. He introduced 0 as a number, the negative numbers as numbers to be added and subtracted and multiplied, just like regular numbers. But he also developed the quadratic formula, how to solve the quadratic equation that we all learned in school. The general formula appears in Brahmagupta's work, Brahmaspurta Siddhant. He's also the first one to solve the Brahmagupta-Pella equation. It's called the Pell equation, gradually being changed to the Brahmagupta-Pell equation because he was the first person to solve that in history. Through these contributions, he really laid the foundations of algebra in the world. Another mathematician that follows is Bhaskaracharya. Bhaskaracharya continued that tradition of Brahmagupta in algebra, and he did it through beautiful poetry. I really feel his works are a great way to teach mathematics because they contain profound ideas of algebra, but expressed in beautiful poetry with imagery of nature and bees and flowers. And you read these poems and you think, what beautiful poetry. And then at the end, a mathematical problem is posed. Or a theorem is explained. And you don't even know that it happened until the end because you thought you were just reading beautiful poetry. A beautiful way to teach mathematics, of great pedagogical value, something that we can learn from today in our own textbooks. I got a chance this afternoon to mention mathematicians Virahanka, Gopala, and Hemachandra, who first came up with the Fibonacci numbers through counting rhythms in poetry. So the origin of the Fibonacci numbers also comes from Indian poets prior to Fibonacci. A beautiful way of learning about the Fibonacci numbers, the Hemachandra numbers, which I hope also we can bring to schools. Again, it's of great pedagogical value because of the beautiful way in which they introduce these numbers through poetry. And then maybe it's worth mentioning Madhava, another great mathematician from around the 15th century in India, earlier. He laid the foundations of what's called the Kerala school of mathematics in India, which developed the seeds of calculus prior to Newton and Leibniz. Again, that's something that's only been discovered in very, very recent times as texts have been translated. There are lots and lots of texts that remain to be translated. This has only happened, the Kerala school has only really been translated into English in the last decade. And from that we discover that so many of the beautiful seeds of calculus, such as infinite series and power series and Taylor series, existed in India prior to their further development by Newton and Leibniz and others, and others in the modern day. And his school went on for some generations and laid down some fantastic mathematics that's still being translated. Maybe I should end by mentioning a 20th century mathematician, Ramanujan, about whom a new Hollywood movie will be coming out later this month. Actually, in Paris, it will come a little bit later, as often happens with Hollywood movies. But this month, it will be coming out in the United States. and in England and in India and in some other countries toward the end of the month. It's called The Man Who Knew Infinity, and hopefully you'll all have a chance to watch that movie to learn about this recent contribution of mathematics from India by Srinivasa Ramanujan. So these are, I just listed 10 mathematicians that I grew up really learning about. I didn't like school when I was growing up, so I used to often stay home or go and visit my grandfather, who was a Sanskrit scholar, and I'd just read his books that were on his shelf and learn mathematics that way. And so the mathematicians I just named, actually, they were my inspirations growing up, because I often skipped school and I learned mathematics from the books that were available to me, and these were some of the books that were available to me. I learned algebra this way, I learned geometry this way, I learned combinatorics, and I learned about modern research mathematics from biographies of Ramanujan. And when I went back to school, I would be surprised that, well, these things are kind of taught sometimes, but under different names, often not realizing that these things were known much before than the names that they were given. And that's how my interest in the history of mathematics developed, was because I saw that a lot of the history was still written in a way that was incomplete. And also, the things that were incomplete, if you filled them in, they had great pedagogical value because they were connected to art and music in ways that I got to talk a little bit about this afternoon. So a lot of these works that I mentioned, they talk about mathematics in a very artistic way, and they introduce concepts in a way that's much different than the way modern textbooks do. And so it's my hope that we can bring back some of these nuggets of history, these beautiful stories of artists doing great mathematics. I hope we can bring some of these treasures back to our schools. It was something that really inspired me, and so I hope we can move forward and try to introduce them to young children again. If it helped me so much, I think it could help in the teaching process for others as well. So thank you so much, and hope to
Thank you, Manju, for that fascinating journey through time of Indian mathematics. Very, very interesting. Now, before we wrap up, the deal was that I will take 3 questions, no more than that, for our 2 mathematicians on stage. I can see young lady's hand going up there. Yes, you have the first question. I think it's very nice that we have a young lady asking a question of the mathematicians. Please go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask, who introduced the concept of division by zero? How did that come up in mathematics? Because that's something that's undefined, so how did that come up?
I think, am I mic'd? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So actually, Brahmagupta discusses division. Once he introduces zero and negative numbers, he discusses addition, multiplication, and subtraction in the way that we talked about today. And then he brings up division, and he talks about division. And then he comes to the topic of division by zero. And he says, you can't do that within this number system. And he says, the only number that you can divide by zero is 0. And that's a statement that he makes, which some mathematicians may or may not agree with today. I agree that it does make sense to divide 0 by 0, but the answer is indeterminate. In other words, 0 divided by 0 can be anything. The reason being that 0 times anything is 0. So if you divide 0 by 0, you can get anything. And that's the statement that Brahmagupta made. But dividing any other number by 0, that can't be done. And that's really the modern viewpoint, even today, that he laid down in his book in 628. Yeah.
Thank you, Manju. Does that answer your question? Should we ask Professor Laforgue to give his interpretation of that? Okay. Any other questions? Yes? We have Professor Mehta. The mic may be handed over to Professor Mehta.
Since there are 3 great mathematicians in this room, let me ask this question. You mentioned Professor Bhargav and Professor Laurent also, that so many ideas basically were questioned, and then a very simple, elegant formulation took humanity further. Now, one of such ideas which was questioned very deeply in India, and that is something that has not been brought to the attention of modern scholars the way it should have been, is the idea of logic itself. So if you take a syllogism, Aristotle is a man, men have heads, therefore Aristotle has heads, doesn't work if different people disagree on the definition of a human being or whether human beings have certain properties. So they developed ways of extending logic to situations which are inherently ill-defined. And the reason for this logic to develop in India, and there are over several thousand years of this, is because a very diverse group of individuals coexisted and lived together. And they wanted to develop the language. You talked about developing a language. And so this is how n-valued logic developed, which then the Polish School of Mathematicians took forward. So I'd love to get your thoughts. If you think such excursions, again, depending on the challenges that we face today of coexistence, of harmony, if such extensions to ideas would be useful.
Oui, ça marche. Excusez-moi, je vais répondre en français. Je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir complètement compris la question, mais je voudrais dire simplement que, bien sûr, il y a une relation très étroite entre la logique et les mathématiques, et ceci nous amène à quelque chose d'extrêmement important et de particulièrement important dans la culture indienne, d'après ce qui m'a été dit, à savoir l'importance de la grammaire. Donc, souvent, je dis, par exemple, à des parents, à des instituteurs, que le premier enseignement des mathématiques pour des enfants n'est pas seulement l'enseignement des chiffres et des opérations, mais que c'est aussi l'enseignement de la grammaire, c'est-à-dire de la structure de la langue. Et donc, je sais que la grammaire du sanskrit est particulièrement subtile, et c'est peut-être une raison pour laquelle les mathématiques se sont particulièrement développées en Inde. Voilà, donc je ne sais pas si j'ai donné des éléments de réponse à votre question.
One more question. Ambassador of Iran, yes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I would like to, first of all, thank you very much, you and your colleagues here. This is in recent months, the second time you organize in this room a gathering to talk deep knowledge. The first one was Sanskrit language, that we learned a lot, and this is the second one. Thank you very much. And this is what in UNESCO we need, because UNESCO is known in the world mostly by this C in UNESCO. That S is unknown,
Yes.
that beautiful S. Now, with this kind of activity, you are bringing that S in the attention of people here and UNESCO. Thank you very much. What I want to say may not be a question, because the answer may not, we may not have time for that, they answer me, but it is probably a comment with a question. That the first speaker, distinguished professor, he said that why zero was not invented in other civilization, and why Indian civilization invented that. This is a deep question. This is the power of canceling, the power he mentioned of annulling. And I think there is a connection between concepts in Indian civilization, in Asian civilization, especially India, that the realm of non-existence is a counterpart, a real counterpart of existence. Even when our mystics, when they want to talk about the transcendental entity of God, of transcendental universe, then they go to the concept of non-existence, something completely different from what exists, and that takes you to non-existence. Even in the modern philosophy like Schleiermacher and other after Kant to discuss the epistemological approach that we need to give meaning to what is the meaning of understanding, how we can understand, how can we contemplate. Then we come to the concept of the importance of the realm of non-existence. The distinguished mathematician, they told us about what happened after invention of this zero, nothing annulling. What happened in this realm of mathematics? I think this may inspire us that to introduce coexistence in this world with all of this turbulence, we have to invent in politics, in our method of education, we have to invent the concept of zero. Means that sometimes we have to not to touch things and let the people be for themselves, let them be a neighbor of the realm of freedom, which is no intervention. And this is, I think, something that India, civilization like that, and UNESCO can contribute a lot. And finally, a distinguished professor from India said that about between poetry and mathematics. And I was reminded that the famous Persian poet Omar Khayyam, he was, in fact, a mathematician. His algebra is known. But he is known as a poet because when he was thinking mathematically, he introduced the most beautiful parts. And this is something that your example of your civilization is very, very much highlighted. What I want to say that if a distinguished professor from India can tell us the question made by the first speaker, why do you think Indian civilization gave birth to the concept of zero, after all, and the concept of non-existence to give meaning to existence? And finally, the poem of Jalaluddin Rumi that he said that I found my existence in the realm of non-existence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Jalali, for that philosophical and very deep insight. I wonder, Manjul, if you'd like to have the last word on this, the question that was posed.
Yeah, we brought up this question a number of times. Why did zero happen there? There are lots of reasons. There was a lot of Indian philosophy that talks about non-existence. The absence of something is just as much as the presence of something. In the Sanskrit language also, there's a symbol for when something disappears. You don't just get rid of it, you put a symbol there called an avagraha, which is like a placeholder. And that was part of the Sanskrit language as well. Because in the rhythms, if something disappeared, you still wanted the rhythm to remain there. So you needed a placeholder, you needed a symbol to represent non-existence of sound for that moment of time. And so these are all possibilities for that non-existence idea. A placeholder idea was there in Indian philosophy for a while, and it's made its way into mathematics.
Isn't that is it the reason that why silence in the Indian philosophy is so important.
Right, right.
Silence is so important. And I think we need in the world to again look at or to invent the concept of silence,
Right, right.
getting rid of all pollutions. Thank you.
Right, right. Yeah.
Well, I think that will bring this program to a close. I think it's really wonderful that we ended with the zero. The theme of the conference was the zero. But before we close, I would like to extend my deepest appreciation and thanks to Minister Smriti Zubin Irani, our minister, who envisioned this event, who supported this event, and who guided us through this event. Also to the Director General UNESCO, also to the Director General UNESCO for her presence, for her support, and for her encouragement. Professor Lokesh Chandra, President of the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, New Delhi, for his highly respected presence amidst us today. The ICCR and Sri Ram Sutarji for this wonderful work of art, the bust of Aryabhat, which now belongs to humanity. Professor Manjul Bhargav, who rescheduled his overcommitted agenda to commit to this conference and to a marathon 3 sessions. Manjul Bhargav is a brilliant mathematician, and in this capacity, he also wears the hat of consultant to the upcoming Hollywood movie, The Man Who Knew Infinity. He just spoke about it. We're all eagerly looking forward to seeing this film, I should tell you. Professor Laurent Laforgue, who gave off his precious time to make this evening a reality, thank you very much. Professor Shailendra Mehta, for taking us through the entire mathematical universe today, from zero to infinity. Professors Mahdi Abdul Jaoud, who flew down from Tunis for this event, and Professors Ahmed Jabbar, Marc Moyon, and Romain Attal. Thank you very much. The Science Division of UNESCO, which has provided us with the most solid and substantive support. Thank you, Flavia Schlegel and Osman Benchik. The Additional Director General, Eric Falt, whose advice I liberally take and took yet again. Vincent Defourny for skillfully moderating all the sessions of the conference. A big thank you to you. Tanya Toledo and the entire team who have backstopped us so admirably in this marathon effort. The audience, it is a matter of joy that you have come for this unique event. We are honored with the presence of Renaud Dondier de Vabre, former Culture Minister of France, for this event. My small team at the Permanent Delegation of India to UNESCO. In this case, small has been truly beautiful. It does seem like a miracle. It does seem like a miracle that we are at the end of this journey. But there are no endings. There must only be beginnings. Thank you very much.